Hey everybody, welcome to Good News Gathering's Videocast series. Over the last several weeks, we have been doing question and answer session from this particular lesson series for equipping the next generation. Now this past Sunday, JD taught on holy emotions. So this videocast, we will be addressing questions that have come from that lesson series. JD and Jeff are going to be providing some answers to the questions that some of you have had. So with that, I will begin with the first question. It is, aren't emotions what make us human? After all, what is a soul if it cannot feel? Who wants to take that?
Well, I can start. I think emotions are part of what makes us human. I wouldn't want to say that alone makes us human, but it's obviously a part. And I thought JD did a great job last Sunday of pointing out the fact that we're made in the image of God, and God is a being with emotions. He's not just some disembodied spirit that doesn't feel what we feel, and he feels with us when we're in pain. He knows what that is. When we experience joy, he knows what that is as well. And I thought the scriptures that you covered last Sunday, JD, really brought that out well. Mm-hmm. So I would say it's part of what makes us human, but it's not the entirety of what makes us human.
Yeah, I mean, to jump off, you got some specific things like, reason, thinking from the week before. You've got not only the emotions, you've got the ability to be creative. So God is a creator, and we talked last week about how he's different than us in that he can create out of nothing. He can just speak and things exist. We don't have that capacity, but we have creative capacity over things he's already given us. And so to say that what is a soul if it cannot feel? Well, it's not the image of God in full. But it wouldn't be completely devoid of some elements of the image of God, and so I wouldn't leave it all to emotion, but it certainly is a big part of who we are as people.
And I think obviously a big point that you tried to make last Sunday is that our emotions have to align with the emotions of God, and where they don't, that's where we get in trouble.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Okay, next question. Is it okay to express emotional pain to God in a raw way? David in the Psalms, such as Psalm 42, seems like we can and should, but do we have freedom of expression with God?
You want to start?
Yeah, sure. I looked up Psalm 42 for the reference that the individual asking this question was pointing to, and there certainly are some very important comments being made by the psalmist in Psalm 42. For example, I say to God my rock. So this is the psalmist saying, I'm saying this to God. Why have you forgotten me? Why must I go about mourning, oppressed by the enemy? My bones suffer mortal agony as my foes taunt me, saying to me all day long, where is your God? So, certainly the psalmist is able to communicate to God raw emotion, real emotion, deep-seated pain, struggle, hurt, heartache, difficulty. And so I think the nature of the Psalms indicates to us in no uncertain terms that God is big enough to handle our emotions. However, I would say that there is a limit to that free expression. Because there are times and situations where we can take our emotional expression to a level that is defiant or disrespectful. We can, out of anger, say things to God that are, frankly, blasphemous, right? If any of us were to ever look at God and say, it feels like you've forgotten about me, I think that's fine. But if you were to end up saying something along the lines of, you don't care about me, well, I frankly feel like that would be a blasphemous thing to say, because the Bible's clear across the board that God cares about his people. And so I would argue that there's probably a limit to that freedom of expression with God, just like there's a limit of freedom of expression that we have with other people. You know, I don't have the right to just say what I want out of my emotional expression to either one of you. Mm-hmm. So why would I feel like I can express just any old thing to God without limit, without reason, or without putting some boundaries on it?
Mm-hmm. Let me give you a couple of examples, and these kind of come from both ends of the spiritual spectrum. Years ago, a good friend of mine who's a Catholic priest worked in the penal system in Chicago, and he worked specifically with young people who were gang members who had been incarcerated. And some of them came to Christ in that process, and what they did is they collected in a little booklet the prayers that these guys had written. And it was fascinating because it was the first, and I remember the first time I read those prayers. Some of them were very raw. They were in a language that I didn't grow up with. But that was the only language they knew. And they expressed their feelings to God in that very raw way. Those were their prayers. Now, would I hope that they grow, obviously, as Christians, and that some of those things that they expressed probably needed some theological help? But by the same token, they were right where they were, and they were connecting with God in the only way they knew how at the time. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure God has grace for that. On the other end of the theological spectrum, and JD kind of alluded to this a moment ago, I met a pastor whose son was an athlete, and his son did these bike rides, something like what JD does. And one day he was out for a ride in the country, and he was attacked by dogs and mauled to death. It was a totally freak accident. Mm. And this pastor talked about how in the aftermath of that event, in the aftermath of losing his son, he would drive out into the country, get out of his car, and literally scream at God. It was an expression of raw anger at what had happened, and why did God let this happen? Now, theologically and over time, he got beyond that. But at the moment, that was where he was at. And you see that in a lot of the Psalms. Mm-hmm. David is under extreme duress. He's under pressure. People around him are dying. He's being chased by a king who's operating out of evil. And he's uptight. And he expresses that. And so I think God, in his infinite wisdom, is able to understand that. Mm-hmm. And when we're maybe perhaps out of line in our language to him, there's, I hope, grace for that.
Okay, next question. Why are we so surprised when others fail to meet our emotional needs, or we fail to meet the needs of others?
Surprised. That's interesting, the way that's phrased. Mm-hmm. Why are we so surprised? Obviously, we live in a fallen world, and we're fallen people. And none of us are God. And so it's never going to be the case where we can meet somebody else's emotional needs. That's beyond our expertise, and it's beyond our capability. And so it shouldn't come as a surprise when we fail to meet others' needs and when they fail to meet ours. Because if we could meet their every need, we would be their God.
Right. It's the simple answer there is we just shouldn't be. We shouldn't be surprised. And at some level, not only should we not be surprised, we should do the very best we can to serve and care for and love other people, and we should do the very best we can to show grace when people don't do that to us. But it's a difficult thing to be in the situation where people are looking at you for emotional support or whatever, and you do the best you can. And I think that's the reality of the Christian life. We're none of us God, like you said.
Yeah, and another element in that I think we have to be aware of is sometimes our emotional needs are improper.
Mm. Right.
And, and you have to be really careful about that, because we are commissioned, I guess you could say, by the Scripture to speak both grace and truth. And sometimes truth doesn't feel the way people want it to feel.
Right.
Does that mean you can't, in order to meet their emotional needs, you don't speak the truth?
Right.
Because it's not going to make them feel good? No. We are charged with speaking the truth in love.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't just meet emotional needs without truth.
Well, and I think to go even farther on that, to your point that our emotions can be misaligned with God, when that's the case, the inevitable reality is somebody's needs are going to get let down, you know, and whether it's ours or whether it's somebody else's. If our emotions are misaligned with what God feels in that particular circumstance, or what God's emotions are about that particular thing, the reality is somebody's going to get hurt. And it might just be us, right? If we go down the road of depression and sadness, and when the situation is really calling for kind of a resolute learning from this situation or whatever, we just kind of go in the hole. That may largely only specifically impact us if we're not too deep in relationship with other people. But for heaven's sake, if the emotion I'm feeling as a result of a particular circumstance, and it's a misaligned anger, for example, that can spray all over a lot of people and hurt a lot of people. And so, the misaligned emotions are a very devastating thing for not only ourselves but for others.
Well, I think we have to remember that reality doesn't change just because it hurt my feelings.
Right.
Okay, truth is what it is.
Yeah, sure.
And that was something my father used to say to me when I was growing up. He said, "Jeff, sometimes the truth hurts." And you have to be able to align yourself with that even when it's uncomfortable.
Yes. Okay, this next question, it has several questions in it, so bear with us here. It says, emotional behavioral issues on occasion require medication. Is it wrong to be on medications to help balance my emotions? Is Christianity against such medications? After all, God created me this way. Am I able to cope without medication? If medication is permissible, is there a point at which there is too much or it becomes wrong?
So, okay, I've worked with a lot of people in my experience with the counseling background as it pertains to people with medication and emotional and behavioral disorders that manifested themselves in such a way that people ended up on some form of psychiatric medication. And a few things I think, to touch on right off. Do I think that there are situations where individuals' emotions and behavioral regulation incapacities do necessitate some form of medical intervention? Yeah, I do. There are certain situations, for example, extreme forms of depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and other things of that nature are very difficult for the individual and for the family of that individual to control apart from medication. Now, is that to say that that's the best case scenario? No. But is it a reality of our world? Yes, I think it is. And so it's something that, to say, is Christianity against medication? I don't think the answer there is yes. I think, in fact, it's a very solid no, because if you go down that road, now you're talking about, what about blood pressure medication, or some antibiotics to get over a disease? I don't think that's the point here. No, I don't believe Christianity is against such things. But I do think the important thing to remember as it comes to something like medication is this. Medication is designed for a particular purpose, all right? As it pertains to emotional and behavioral disorders, medication is designed to help put you in the frame of mind to be able to make wise decisions, right? Medication is in and of itself not the cure for the disorder, right? Because the disorder may involve some kind of, for example, a neurotransmitter imbalance in our brain, right? And that manifests itself in certain kinds of behaviors, certain kinds of thought processes, etc. We are a complex mind-body duality, and where the neurotransmitter imbalance begins and the thought processes and behaviors end is a very difficult line to understand. But we've got to remember that medication isn't going to fix any mental or emotional problems we may be having in and of itself. Quite frequently, it's the combination of some supportive counseling or work with groups of people to help us or engagement with others, plus some strategies for behavioral management and improvement along with that medication that's most helpful for actually solving the problem, because the problem goes deeper than our brain chemistry. The problem manifests itself in behaviors and actions and words and thoughts, and if we don't treat the whole problem, we're probably not going to see a lot of benefit.
Yeah, and you know, I think we always have to bear in mind that you know, God is the great physician, and so obviously, if there are issues going on in a person's life, we need to be in prayer. We need to be surrounding ourselves with positive Christian influences.
Right.
And hopefully medication is somewhere down the line in the list of things that we employ to help us with a particular problem. But if it's necessary, it's necessary. I represented a number of people who were found not guilty by reason of insanity. I mean, there were issues in those cases that demanded some level of medication help, because those people simply could not deal with reality as the rest of us are able to do so. So there is a need for it. No question.
One of the questions that the person asked in there is, am I able to cope without it? And the answer to that is it depends. That's work with perhaps a medical professional. If you're already on medication, the last thing you need to do without talking to somebody is stop. Because it's important to understand, what is it that medication is designed to do? What is it actually doing in your system? Or this is why we have doctors. And if you were to yank it off immediately, what's the rebound effect going to be? Because there's going to be that. And so even if you're on a medication and you're determining that, number one, it may not be working for you, or number two, you would like to see what it would look like to work yourself to the place of not having to depend upon it, that may very well be a noble and positive goal, but you're going to want to work with a physician to wean your way off of that. Most likely, I'm sure there are some medications that are pretty safe to just quit, but that's going to be a conversation with your doctor. There are some medications, if you just quit them overnight, they could send you even psychiatric medications or other things of that nature that could result in significant withdrawal syndromes, etc. So you got to be really careful as it pertains to medication. If you're already on it, work with a doctor before you make any changes. That's just the smart way to go.
Well, I remember years ago there was a situation at a church that I was at where I actually told somebody, don't come back unless you're on your meds. And I know that sounds really harsh, but the fact was, when they were off their meds, they presented a danger to themselves and to others around them. And you know, when you're in a position of leadership, you have to think of the whole. And when you have children on site and other folks on site that could be harmed by an individual if they're off their meds, you have a duty to everybody.
Yeah.
So,
One other question that the person asked at the end is there a point at which it becomes too much? And that's something that, again, you're going to want to work with a professional to deal with that. But I would offer maybe a thought about that particular issue. If for you, the medication is a support to the work you're doing in kind of the counseling process, perhaps, or just life management process, if it's a support for the rest of what you're doing, that's fine. If you're laying your whole effort in dealing with your mental or emotional challenge on that medication, number one, the odds that you're going to see great benefit are questionable, because quite often it's the combination of efforts that makes the most difference. But secondly, it in and of itself can become something of I don't want to say addictive, but it's got that quality to it where you're more concerned about not having it than you're concerned about making the behavioral changes and the thought changes and the counseling and the getting support from other people, et cetera, et cetera. That can be a real problem. And so while, you've got to watch yourself and have some insight into, is this actually helping me get where I want to go? Ask some critical questions. Am I growing alongside the support this medication is providing me, or am I just leaning on this medication for all it's worth? That's an important question to ask, because if the medication is the only thing helping you, then it's possible, I don't want to say that it is, but it's possible that you're missing out on growth opportunities that could either make that medication less necessary over time, or make it more of a necessity in your life than it honestly should be.
Okay, and our final question. We as Christians should stand in line with the emotions of God. So, should the church stand in line with the emotions of God? Should the church be speaking out in our communities against all the evils that are being done? Rights being taken, infringements on free speech, forced vaccines, and censorship, and so on. Don't you believe that God would want us to speak out?
okay, I'll start off with this one. I think the answer is yes. God would want us to speak out against evil in our culture. And you find this in the Old Testament. I'll just read you a couple of verses from Ezekiel chapter 3, starting at verse 17. It says, "Son of man, I have made you a watchman for the people of Israel. So hear the word I speak and give them warning from me. When I say to a wicked person, you will surely die, and you do not warn them or speak out to dissuade them from their evil ways in order to save their life, that wicked person will die for their sin, and I will hold you accountable for their blood. But if you do warn the wicked person, and they do not turn from their wickedness or from their evil ways, they will die for their sin, but you will have saved yourself." In other words, the church that doesn't stand up for truth, and the church that doesn't stand up for what's right and speak out about those things, that church is in serious trouble as you read this passage, okay? And God's very clear about that. And that's why, especially in the last few years, I think this church has taken more of I guess you could say, a more direct approach to addressing cultural issues that are facing the people of our church and our community. And we've spoken out very clearly on many, many different issues. And so, yes, I do believe that's important. By the same token, I think we have to be careful. JD,
We've talked about this before. And we, a couple days ago, we actually sat down and talked over some of these questions. And one of the things that I think is dangerous is the potential that churches, in the process of speaking out about truth, can conflate biblical rights and responsibilities with American rights and responsibilities. And that's a dangerous thing for us to do. So the person asks, should the church be speaking out in our community against all the evils that are being done? And the answer is an obvious yes. You think about Matthew chapter 5. Jesus is teaching on the Sermon on the Mount. He says, you're the salt of the earth. Right? What does salt do? It preserves things. So you, Christians, you're the church. You are, by your behavior, by the things you affirm, by the things you condemn, by the way that you live your lives, you're effectively preserving and holding the world together. Well, what a cool image, right? That we as Christians, by our life and behavior, are keeping the world at bay from the wrath of God. That we're the ones kind of keeping this world from going to hell in a handbasket, if you will. And then he says, you're the light, right? Like a city on a hill. What's the light? Well, we're sharing the gospel with people. So we're telling people the truth, what to believe. The true light of the world is the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we're the ones sharing that. And so he says, you're the salt, you're the light, you gotta be that in the world. And so of course we should speak out against evil in our world. But the reality is things like rights being taken, free speech, forced vaccines, censorship, things of that nature that were explicitly mentioned in the question. We got to be careful that in our fight with the world, that our fight doesn't become a purely political fight. You see, I've grown up from the entirety of my life in a country where I've been free. But approximately 0% of the New Testament was written in that kind of culture. The Apostle Paul, Peter, all of the disciples faced extreme persecution for being a Christian in that culture. And were they out there fighting for free speech? No, they weren't. They were out there to spread the gospel. Right? They weren't trying to fight for social issues. They were trying to fight for the gospel being shared with as many people as possible. Now, here's the thing. America has been a free nation largely because of its Christian underpinnings. Exactly. You take that away, and what you're going to get is extremism, totalitarianism, division, control, all that kind of stuff. So as we watch the foundations of America erode, i.e. the Christian, Judeo-Christian foundations, we're going to see a whole lot more garbage start to happen in our culture. But our job isn't to go, we need America back. No, we need the gospel proclaimed to as many people as possible. Now, politically, should we vote for those rights? I think we should. Right? Should we vote for people who will help us continue those rights? Absolutely. Should we encourage people to consider the potential negative outcomes of losing those rights or of having a situation where the government gets to tell you what to do with like a vaccine or things of that nature? Yeah, I think you should speak out about those things, but they can never be the most important thing. And that's the problem. Yeah. I think where churches can get out of whack is when they make the political thing the most important thing.
Right. We have to be careful that we don't get into a position where as a church we're trying to make America great.
Right.
Okay. Our job is to make Christ great.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
and I think we always have to keep that in balance. Believe me, I am so thankful that I was raised in the United States, that I'm a citizen of this great country. I am so thankful for that and thankful for the freedoms I have. But if those go away, it's still about Christ first. Mm-hmm. And it always has to be. And we just have to remember that.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's the big issue, is we can be Christians without free speech. We can be Christians with our rights taken away. Mm-hmm. That's the truth. And unfortunately in our culture, with things like the vaccine, and I want to be very clear, people are free to make whatever choice they want to make with regard to the vaccine. But as it pertains to the government or businesses telling you you must, etc., there are going to be collisions of faith and government pressure. There are going to be. And we just have to make the decisions that we feel in our heart we should make, and through prayer and connection with the Holy Spirit, allowing Him to guide us as it pertains to those kinds of things. But there are going to be more collisions of this kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But we can't lose sight of the fact that our goal is to be Christians in the world, distinctively Christians. And if we can do so, one of the perfect examples is the Apostle Paul, right? There were times when he exerted his Roman citizenship.
Yes.
And he was happy to tell you he was a Roman citizen, and he used it on and born with it, right? And he used it on a couple of occasions to get himself out of harm's way.
Right.
That's fine, right? If in this culture you have freedom of speech, then use it. That's good. Use it. Use it until you ain't got it no more.
Right.
Right. But for Paul, even having that Roman citizenship wasn't his most important thing.
Right.
It was being a preacher and a church planter and a missionary for Christ. That was the most important thing. And he never ever lost sight of that, even when his Roman citizenship was useful.
Mm-hmm. And you think about his Roman citizenship, it was a vehicle.
Right.
I mean, that allowed him the freedom
to
travel across the Roman world.
Right.
That got him out of a couple of really serious binds at times. And
might have ended up dead if he wasn't.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And so he wasn't afraid to assert the rights he had.
Mm-hmm.
And so we shouldn't be either.
Yeah.
Thank you, JD. Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
And thanks to all of you. We appreciate you joining us with this G&G Videocast as we addressed questions dealing with holy emotions. And we will see you next time.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Have a good one.